There's a theory in New Zealand that if house prices fall, then it's going to make it more affordable for people in lower socioeconomic jobs. Was that the Irish experience?
So if you kept your job in Ireland, when property prices started to fall, you were able to benefit from that. In fact, a 50% fall in property prices, a 30% fall in rents, that was good for the economy, but only if you kept your job. About 200,000 people became unemployed in an economy that's roughly the same size as New Zealand's. So there were plenty of people who lost out their livelihoods. So they weren't able to afford housing no matter what the price was.
Because when a property bubble bursts, there's a lot of collateral damage to jobs and to things that are related to it, aren't there?
Yeah, so Ireland was a classic example where too much of the economy had become focused on building, not just homes, but also shopping centres and offices and so on. So when all of that stopped, when the credit markets froze up internationally, then you saw in Ireland huge collateral damage, not only in construction, but also in the public services, which had become too reliant on construction as a means for funding their services, and also in retail and other parts of the economy.
I was at a ghost estate yesterday, and I wondered whether a ghost estate is a symptom of a ghost economy, that this isn't a real economy when you just depend on real estate quite so much. What do you think?
I think there is a danger in becoming overly reliant on real estate and construction, and I think it's a tough one, particularly in an economy like New Zealand, together with places like Canada and Australia, where there's a sort of a route for Chinese and Asian money into them. It's not enough just to have minimum deposit rules like Ireland has introduced, because there's other capital. It's not all about borrowing for mortgages. There's other money coming into the economy. So it's not an easy one to manage, but at least as a sovereign country, you can manage the capital coming in if you choose to. And I know in Ireland, for example, when the economy collapsed, a lot of foreign direct investment, a lot of companies that are here to access the EU market, talking to them in 2010 or 2011, 3 years after the economy turned, they said the economy's never been so competitive because rents were down 30%, prices were down 50%. It was easy to attract workers to come from other parts of Europe into Dublin because housing was affordable and available. Housing may be available, but if it's not affordable, then you could be building up problems. And one problem that Ireland built up that we're only discovering now is that the bubble has left a legacy, that construction costs are still significantly higher in Ireland than they are in other countries. And that means that even though everything else has come back into line with our incomes, the actual labour and materials costs of building a property hasn't. And that's why we've had such a poor supply response now that the demand has started up again, the economy has picked up again.
So there was a theory in New Zealand that all you have to do to make houses more affordable is just to build lots of them.
Building houses to make them more affordable only works if there's people living in the houses. If they're kept empty, or if the houses are inhabited by new migrants coming in, then you're actually not making housing affordable for the people who were there first off. So you have to make sure they're lived in. So are there tax penalties for keeping property vacant, for example? And if there's migration, that's fine. Migration is good. People have chosen your location as somewhere to have their economic lives. But is supply also there specifically for the local demand? The other problem, of course, is if you build supply where the demand isn't. And that, I think, was Ireland's biggest mistake, that actually Dublin, for example, the biggest city in Ireland, didn't see overbuilding at nearly the same rate as some of the rural counties. And those rural counties are still suffering from the ill effects of having too much property at the same time Dublin now has too few.
What are the major lessons, do you think, that we as New Zealanders should learn from the Irish experience?
I suppose the key metric that I would look for would be the relationship between house prices and rents. One of the giveaway signs in Ireland was that all this new property was being built, but there weren't enough people to live in them, so rents were actually falling, but prices were rising because people were getting all this credit from the banks and people thought there was no rainy days ahead. So prices kept on rising, but rents actually were falling. That's a sort of a fundamental barometer of health. Vacant homes, and also the underlying domestic demand. How much demand is there for new homes per year just from the people who live in the economy? Yes, you can cater for extra demand coming in from elsewhere, but if you're not making homes that are affordable for people who live in the domestic economy, you're not solving a problem. You're creating a second economy, that's fine, but you're not addressing the problems in the first economy. And one other thing, in relation to social housing sits at the base of the pyramid of housing needs in an economy. And if you hitch social housing to the market, or if you sell off your social housing stock, as happened in Ireland and the UK and other countries for ideological reasons, you just create problems for the future. You don't actually create any long-term solutions. The market will never provide housing for people who don't have an income to cover the costs of their housing needs. So the state needs to be actively involved in providing housing on an ongoing basis, perhaps for as much as a third of the population. This is something that Ireland is only realising now, 10 to 15 years after trying to sell off its social housing stock and hitch social housing to the market. But we know that that doesn't work. We have homeless families living in cars and living in guest houses and hotels. And this is so obviously spotted from a distance, but for ideological reasons we went down that route. I'm reasonably pro-market, but at the same time, the market has limits. It's not going to be able to provide housing for people who can't afford their own housing. So for that reason, I'd be very worried that allowing the real estate sector to become a large part of your economy tricks the government into thinking there's lots being built, therefore we don't need to build. And then once the music stops, once China finds somewhere else to put its money or the local economy turns, all of a sudden you have different levels of government that are stripped of the ability to provide housing for people who need it.